So thank you everyone for coming. It's great to be in Tel Aviv, and I'm gonna try to do like a really good job to talk about how to survive continuous innovation. It's a new term. Maybe other people have mentioned it before, but I was talking with Sharon, and she was like, "Hey, why don't you submit a talk for DevOpsDays Tel Aviv?" And I was at DevOpsDays Rome, and then I also go to DevOpsDays Amsterdam quite a bit. It's like, yeah, sure, let's go to Tel Aviv. Let's submit a talk. So I went a little bit outside my comfort zone. I'm not going to talk about Kubernetes or containers. I'm going to talk about continuous innovation. Okay. And click. Yes. And of course, it's a little bit strange for me. I think a lot of us suffer from imposter syndrome, and you all look really smart. Looks like you all know what you're doing. And I always feel like I'm not sure I know what I'm doing. I'm not a dev. I'm actually not an ops either. I'm more of a tester, product manager, / marketing / evangelist. It's a big bundle of things that, hopefully makes sense. But, when I decided to write the talk, I thought, it doesn't matter. What you need to do is share your perspective, share, your experience in IT, your experience with software, and then share that with people. And hopefully, they're going to learn something good and then come out of the keynote saying, hey, that's interesting. I should think about this a little bit more. I go to a lot of conferences, and when I go to a conference, I always try to do two things. I try to, attend a good talk, and you don't have to attend 20, but attend a good talk, get some good swag, and then learn something very interesting from someone. So that's what I'm going to try to do here. Share my perspective, and hopefully you're going to learn something interesting. Very excited to come to Israel because I came here with my kids' wife like 3 years ago. We had a beautiful trip throughout entire Israel. We went to the Dead Sea, we went to Eilat, came back up. It was really beautiful trip. So tomorrow I'm going to sneak out. I'm going to go back to Jerusalem and then walk around. And really, you have a beautiful country. And really liked it. So really happy to be here. People, there is an issue when I'm sitting here, standing here in front of you, and you're like, "Who is this guy?" It looks like he's French. He has a little bit of an accent, but what's his background? We don't really know him. So you can look me up, of course, on LinkedIn and Twitter. But I thought, a couple pictures to give you my bio. So I'm not a developer. I'm actually an electrical engineer. I started by designing radios and then working on electromagnetics and radars for the army and building things like this, like amplifiers and then, basically microwave monolithic circuits. And I got totally sidetracked doing this. I started doing simulation of those. And when you do simulations, you need to write code and then run that on big clusters. So now I was using big clusters, and I got totally sidetracked again. I keep being sidetracked. That's the story of my life. And I got sidetracked, and I started working on clouds. And before they were called clouds, they were called grids, except that one day we sprinkled virtual machines on top of those grids, and they became clouds. So I did a lot of work on clouds. And now, I write books, and I wrote the Kubernetes cookbook because, of course, virtual machines, are so like 1995. No? Okay. 2009, 10, 15. But, of course, I started doing containers, and this book is coming out soon, $49.99 on O'Reilly. You can all go buy it. And now I work at Bitnami as Senior Director of Cloud Technologies. I actually had a startup in Switzerland, and Bitnami bought us for all the Kubernetes work we were doing. So that spares you like a tour to LinkedIn, and you get, a very quick idea of who I am. So now a little personal story, because I think that's the idea of sharing your perspective, and then hopefully you can get something something from it. My personal story is that I spent a lot of time in academia doing research. So I was writing a bunch of scientific papers, studying cloud, studying virtualization. So that's just like some snapshots from Google Scholar. So I wrote an evaluation of KVM for use in cloud computing. dynamic provisioning of virtual organization clusters. That sounds like a mouthful, but what does that mean? VOs, virtual organization, they were the big thing in grid computing. And basically they are, virtual clusters. And then dynamic provisioning, well, that's basically a cloud. You have an API, and then you call that API and say, hey, give me a virtual cluster, give me some VMs. So before you had EC2, we were talking about things like this, like virtual organization clusters that you provision thanks to virtual machines. So I was doing all of this. That was published in 2009. That means that the work actually started maybe in 2006 because academia takes a long time to get papers out. And, everything was going well. But of course, there are other people in academia that were doing similar things, like Rich Wolski at University of Santa Barbara. Guys, you know Rich Wolski? You've heard of him? UCSB. And then, one day I was sitting there, and then boom, this came out on the news. Eucalyptus system raises $5.5 million for a hybrid approach to cloud computing. So Rich Wolski, who was doing very similar research to mine, and, granted, much smarter, person than me, he's older, and he was doing, much better work. Suddenly, he's doing the same thing, and he just raised $5.5 million, and he has a startup, and it's Eucalyptus. And from there, the world goes crazy with Eucalyptus, because it's a clone of AWS. A little bit later, a couple years later, they raised 30 million round C, and it says to take on VMware, okay? Which I think was kind of interesting, because these days you actually see exactly the same. I looked for it. I looked for exactly the same headline about Docker. Like Docker raises 60 million to take on VMware, but I didn't find the exact same headline, okay? But the bottom line is that I was doing this research, and we were writing software with my research group. The guys were good. We were writing good software. We were testing it. We were deploying it. We were measuring performance at scale. This was good stuff. And then at the same time, there's somebody else at UCSB. His software just, hits the jackpot, and suddenly it becomes, used, or at least maybe not used, but known heavily, and people start looking at it and saying, hey, I want to use Eucalyptus, okay? So it really triggered me. So I was in academia, and I was like, why this software? Why this software and not another one? How do we find software? How you guys have problems in your enterprise. You're dealing with issues like monitoring or provisioning, configuration. How do you find the software that can help you and bring a solution? How do you choose? How do you choose one software versus another? Because hopefully it's a rational choice. You've been doing some testing, you've been doing some studies, but more often than not, I think that people actually choose software, almost like on gut. Okay. And then why do we adopt software? Why do we adopt this one versus another one? So those were, kind of the questions that I was, asking myself at that time. And I decided to, get on an adventure and try to figure this out. So I actually left academia, went to corporate side. I went to the dark side. I went really dark. I took a job at Citrix, which was but, it was good pay, it was good fun, so that was good. So of course, when we talk about why this software and not another one, and why do we adopt this, definitely there are trends in the industry. We know that we have trends, okay? And that's, of course, the Google trend. It's not perfect, but it's difficult to find data for this. Okay, it's not perfect, but you get it. So what do you see? 2008 time, well, I'm too far from here, but you see 2008, the green line picks up, that's Eucalyptus. A little bit later, the blue line that goes really high, that's OpenStack. The purple line, that's CloudStack. I worked on CloudStack for Citrix. You see that it doesn't go up too much, it falls down. And then the red line, that's Kubernetes. It's just skyrocketing, okay? That's the really in thing. And then I plotted the yellow line also, that if you see the yellow line, it's AWS Lambda. So AWS Lambda is also picking up a lot. So we know that there are trends. And the problem with trends is that they also represent fashion. And should we use fashion? Should we bet our solutions, bet our systems on fashion? And of course you're gonna say, no, we shouldn't bet on fashion. But yeah, I'm sure a lot of us bet on fashion. The problem with fashion is that you see things like this, and that was last year. Oh my God, Lambda is killing it. That was just after AWS reInvent. oh my God, Lambda is killing it. People are going to skip container orchestrators, straight. They're going to go straight to serverless, and just stop your cloud effort. Ditch your OpenStack or your cloud stack effort. Forget about containers. We go serverless on bare metal. Okay, that was the fashion. That was it's still happening. Who is doing this? There you go, straight to bare metal, and Lambdas, right? So we're not going to talk about it technically, but that's the kind of things that you may hear. And then there was another thing that troubled me, during all that time, and when I was looking at the software, is that if you look at R&D budget, money that's being put in R&D that creates innovation, creates software, more and more, it's dominated by Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, GAFA, right? So GAFA here, that's from 2015, I think. Yeah, that's 2015 data. So you see that 2015 data, the GAFA was $36 billion a year. And right now, I couldn't find the exact data, but it should roughly be $100 billion a year. And you need to put this in comparison that the R&D budget of Israel from Wikipedia, okay, I mean, you guys will correct me, okay, but it should be $15 billion. Okay, so Amazon spends more on R&D, or twice as much on R&D, or 3 times as much on R&D as Israel. And they spend probably as much as France. Okay, so I think we are seeing this trend that now all the innovation and consequently a lot of software that we're going to see are actually driven by companies rather than more, I would say, research, unaffiliated. Let's call it like that, unaffiliated research. Okay, so that's something that's interesting to me, and it's making me wonder a little bit, and maybe that's a subject for open space. So a couple observations. I think that there's a perceived increased pace of software innovation. Do you guys feel that too? Do you guys feel that there's more and more software coming at you, more and more tools coming at you? Yes? No? Yes. Okay, my keynote is saved. Because that's what I feel. I feel like there's more and more software coming in. And then budgets, R&D budget is more and more dominated by companies. So when we see, what is available to us is actually really driven by vendors. It's not, I'm not saying it's really bad, but that's definitely the tendency. And what we're saying from more of an academic standpoint is that instead of having a brain drain, like 25 years ago in France, we were very worried because all the brains were going to the US. We call that brain drain. And now it's not, brain drain to another state, it's brain drain to a corporation. So all the French brains are going to, Google or Amazon or, somewhere. So is that a problem? We'll see. And then there is this expectation that, us, like workforce, IT professionals, we should be trained on all those new technologies. But how can you keep up with all of this when every 6 months, there is something new? It's super, super difficult. I would say that I'm in a privileged situation because that's kind of my job to do tech watch, to monitor all those technologies and then, find the time to test them. And even now, I struggle to have the time to test all those techs. So if you actually are writing software and operating it in production, I bet that you have very little time to study everything that's coming at you. So to illustrate this, let's look at the landscapes that we're seeing these days, okay? The landscapes, and then we are asking everybody to be a full stack engineer because that's, the new thing, right? Well, here you go. Here's your full stack, okay? Good luck. Docker ecosystem. I'll let you look at all the logos. And when I was putting the slides together, I looked up on Google, and there are tons more landscapes. Okay, it's actually kind of funny to look at all of them. Of course, like here you see like console is under orchestration. Why is console under orchestration? This was before Kubernetes, so there is no Kubernetes. So of course, those landscapes are changing a lot. And then you have other landscapes, automation, and of course, to do release management, the one that I find funny is Excel, so release management with Excel. It's actually, I find it funny, but it's not that entirely funny because when I started CloudStack, started working on CloudStack, I met one of the guys, and CloudStack had a totally unsecure port. We called it the management API that, of course, you should turn off, okay? But there was a management API, and you could talk straight HTTP, no SSL, to it, and you could do configuration. So the guy to do the configuration of the cloud had written an Excel spreadsheet with HTTP URLs, and he would click on his spreadsheet, to do the configuration of the cloud. And I looked at it and I was like, wow, yeah, wow, super secure. And we are DevOps, so here is your landscape. Here is, everything that you need to learn because you're doing DevOps. You're a DevOps engineer, right? Everybody is a DevOps engineer here. So here is your stack. It's totally unmanageable. That's crazy. I don't blame the vendors, okay? They are trying to say, hey, here's the state of, the solutions that are out there. Here's the state of software. But as a user, as an engineer, if you look at something like this, there is no way you can do it. And if you do big data, good luck, okay? If you do big data, good luck, because, I don't know, impossible. And you think this is the end. You think that this is just like potentially vendors, trying to say, hey, look, my software is part of the landscape. But this is the newly formed Cloud Native Computing Foundation. That's the CNCF landscape. This is brand new. CNCF, that's where Kubernetes is. Kubernetes has been donated as the seed project to this foundation. And the landscape, and they're putting this landscape together. It started with just Kubernetes, and then they added the software that are part of the foundation, and now they have this. And I know them very well. They're all friends. But this is getting a little bit insane as well, I hear that they're working on a 3D version. because the 2D version, you cannot figure out anything, so they're working on a 3D version. You probably can't see it, but like next to the barcode, it says, hey, here's the cloud native landscape. So if you're doing cloud native, and we don't really know what that means, okay? You're running an application with containers in the cloud, something like that. They still haven't defined it. But if you're doing cloud native, they say, here are all the solutions that you can use. And of course, some of these are part of the DevOps landscape and the blah, blah landscape and the other landscape. But they're saying the path most traveled is the path with the blue boxes. So they are giving you the idea that, yeah, by the way, that's the total landscape, but you should really pay attention to the software that are part of the CNCF. So Kubernetes, Prometheus for monitoring, Notary and Tough are now part of that, Rocket, Containerd. So, they're giving you a hint of, hey, you should use this. And who is using Envoy here? Right. If you go to the Silicon Valley, okay, and you're not using Envoy, you're totally out of it, okay? Your stuff's not gonna work. It's gonna break tomorrow. You're not using Envoy. Oh my God, okay? But they make you think that it's the future, okay? And I know it's in the future. I'm part of this, a little bit. I'm part of this movement. I kind of help that, those ideas, okay? But we have to fight all of this as a community. It's the future. And do you know this blog from Circle CI? Have you read this? Okay, so you should definitely read this blog, okay? Google Circle CI, it's the future. It's hilarious dialogue between a guy that says, or somebody that says, hey, I have this application, it's a web app, I want to deploy it, what do I do? And then there's somebody else answering. It's like, oh, dude, you need to go containers, and then you need a fleet of servers, and then you have 12 microservices, and then you have etcd orchestrating, and it's hilarious. You have to read it because that type of conversation, happens a lot. And you go from, hey, I'm trying to put this little tiny app in production with it's just a web app, to deploying a brand new infrastructure with cutting-edge software that just got released. So we have to fight this. The problem is that, as an industry, I think we're starting to build this, which is the fear of missing out, FOMO. You know, oh my God, if you're not using Envoy, you're missing out. You don't have encryption between all your serverless functions in your data center. Dude, you're going to get attacked, okay? You're missing out. You need to use Envoy. Well, okay, try to use Envoy. Check out the documentation. I mean, it's not ready, okay? You need to use distributed tracing. You need to use open tracing. The spec is great. It comes from Uber. It's called Jaeger tracing. It's great. Well, okay, check the documentation. Yeah, exactly. And then there is a problem of being cool versus not being cool. And of course, everybody would like to be cool. Okay, we all want to be cool. But what's happening? We have a lot of social pressure. Yeah, that's true. Even in IT, we have social pressure to be cool and to use the latest thing. We have to fight this somehow, because it leads to things like this. And I stole that term from Chris Beutert. So Chris is one of the instigators of DevOps. He does a lot of the DevOps talks out of Belgium. I mean, he goes to. I'm sure he came here, right? Yeah. Has he come here? No. So he recently coined that term, and maybe somebody else coined that term, which is zero-day software. Instead of zero-day vulnerability, it's zero-day software. So console 234 just came out. We go production. No testing. We go production. Zero-day software. Put in production. This is just insane. The GIF doesn't work. Do I need to? Yeah, exactly. PDF, no GIF. You're right. It worked in Keynote. Oh my God, I use proprietary software. So, I think that's what's happening. Does that resonate? Yeah, kind of. Yeah. So why this explosion of software, and why this kind of feeling this pressure? Let's go back to that trend. And what happened in 2008? Stock market. GitHub. GitHub was created in 2008. Okay? So it's not long ago. How were we sharing software before 2008? I have no clue. I don't remember. SourceForge. Oh my God. SVN. Oh my God. 2000 CVS. No security. Oh my God. Oh my God. We were emailing patches. Oh my God. So 2008, GitHub, and look, that's exactly when Yuka started. And I love AWS. You think that AWS started, S3 started in 2005? 2005, S3, and EC2, 2006. Okay, that was before GitHub. GitHub started 2008. And then look at the growth of GitHub. So at the bottom, you have 2008, 38,000 repos. 38,000 repos. Are you kidding? I have 20,000 containers in production. So 38,000 repo in 2008, 41,000 users. That's nothing. Look at the growth. 2012, 4 million, 2.7 million users. And from Wikipedia, like the source of truth for the world, 57 million repos right now, 20 million users. Okay, that's huge. So I don't know if it's exponential, but definitely a huge, power boost there. 20 million users is a very interesting number to me, because I've been trying to figure out how many IT professionals there are in the world. So define IT professionals. It's really not easy, okay, to actually find a number, because if you look at Microsoft related data, they said that they have 30 million Microsoft people. So, it's probably something like 50 million, I would say, So we're getting close to everybody who is touching software or using ops is on GitHub. It's pretty close. I mean, some people say, it's 20 million IT thing. And why does this matter? Because software is eating the world. That's Anderson Horowitz in 2011 that said this. All the companies, all the new businesses are based on software innovation. Software is eating the world. Open source is eating software. That's the red fish eating the blue fish. And then the blue fish is Amazon. So the light blue. It's supposed to be cloud, okay? But since the cloud is, 70% AWS. Yeah. So, open source is now eating software. Everything we do software is open source. So everything we do, in software is on GitHub. Okay? And OSS, because of GitHub, this is social collaboration. So there is a link to Twitter. It's very social, the way we share software and so on. So every vendor is now doing open source software. Almost every solution these days is open source. If a vendor is not doing open source, they're being asked, why isn't this open source? We are starting to expect everything for free, right? Except maybe support. Free support, that would be nice. A lot of open source conferences are very, very, very vendor driven, except DevOps Days and FOSDEM, and thank you to all the sponsors. Woohoo! Now, I mean, it's, I'm not banging on the sponsors, and I work for a company and I'm here because, somebody is paying, of course. But there are lots of conferences that are heavily, driven by vendors, and it's all about, making sure that people use your solution, of course. There is an explosion of tools, so we've seen that. And software go viral thanks to social media. So thanks to Twitter, thanks to GitHub, software are going viral. So we have this tendency of saying, oh my God, this is going viral. You put Envoy in production now. Everybody's starting Envoy. I need to put it in production. So it has, additional issues. But let's remember DevOps, okay? And it's kind of funny for me to say this because, I don't think I'm a DevOps guy, but let's remember DevOps, okay? And the first time I went to Amsterdam, and DevOps Days Amsterdam, I was there, and John Willis was talking. So John is also one of the instigators, the creator of the DevOps movement with Patrick Desbois and so on. And John is a great guy. You should follow him on Twitter, follow his presentation. And he started talking about culture. And I was like, oh my God, are you kidding? I came to a tech conference. I want to hear about tech. I want to see software. I want to see code. I want to know how you're managing this stuff in production. That's what I want to learn. I don't want to learn about culture. Okay. That was me. That was me thinking that. And now as I'm looking at this and seeing this explosion of software, I'm like, okay, it's all about culture, guys. So we need to have the right culture in our companies to be able to face, this evolution. One of the big thing about DevOps, definitely, if you haven't read it, you should read the DevOps project, the Phoenix project. Who has read the Phoenix project? Okay, that's not enough people. Everybody needs to read the Phoenix project. It's written big. You can read it in one weekend. And it's not a tech book. It's actually a novel, and it's a novel about IT professionals and how they are struggling with putting software in production, managing it, and meeting the demands of the business. It's a great book, and it's really, really funny. Okay, so you should read that Phoenix Project book by Gene Kim, also, and one of the leaders of the DevOps movement. And what you hear in the Phoenix Project is a lot about the culture that we need in a company to be able to face this. Because what are we trying to do? We're trying to bring value to the company. Okay, we're trying to bring value to the customers. We used to have waterfall model. You design, you build, you release, and the value comes much later in the game. So now everything we're trying to do, of course, this by going agile and so on, we're trying to bring value every step of the way, and we're trying to reiterate. So thanks to Container Solution for this slide that just arrived on Twitter like 3 days ago. I thought it was great. Microservices, again, it's a new idea about how you create your application, how you manage your application. But the underlying idea is that it brings you value even much faster. Okay? So that's what we do. We bring value to our customers, whether they're internal or external. So the principles, we work as self-organizing team. We're not silos. We don't throw jar files, across the wall like this. It's not basketball or volleyball. It's not volleyball. But we work as self-organizing team. We have empathy between devs and ops. Okay, definitely a big thing. We deliver value early and continuously. That's the reason why we're using some of those tools, is to be able to deliver that value and then continuously, keep on doing it. But the main point is that we have to solve customers' problems. And I used to hate that term customer because I was in academia and you don't do anything for money in academia. So I was like users, okay? But that's fine. Let's call them customers, and they can be internal, they can be external, okay? And you know, sometimes you don't make them pay. So we solve customers' problems. That's what we do. So I went back to Agile, okay? I'm a certified Scrum Master. Yeah. Thank you. I rarely use it, but you know, I went through the training. I went back to the Agile Manifesto. Okay, you can go, you can search it. Agile Manifesto. What do you see in the Agile Manifesto? Individuals and interaction, working software, blah blah blah. What's interesting, the one line I wanted to get out of the Agile Manifesto is we choose individuals and interaction over processes and tools. So that's more in the context of how do we work together, do we use Kanban, do we put post-its and things like this, but we choose this over tools. So, you know, we're not an Envoy shop, or we're not a Kubernetes shop, or we're not a Docker shop, okay? We're not focusing on tools. We need to focus on solutions and you know, not the tools. So remember DevOps, we're not here to build cool software, we're not here to be hip, we're here to provide solutions, you know, while having fun, okay? We have to find this balance. It's all about finding a balance between, you know, using cutting-edge software that we may need to actually fix a problem, but, you know, we cannot just adapt software because, you know, it's the cool thing to do. And Chris, you know, Beutert, I was talking with him, and he's been much more aggressive in this message recently in Europe, so you should look up his SlideShare account, Chris Beutert. He's written several talks, you know, the return of the dull stack engineer. And the dull stack engineer is not someone who knows the entire landscape, because nobody can know that landscape, at least, and definitely not in depth. But a dull stack engineer is somebody who knows maybe 3 or 4 solutions, but knows them in depth, and then really can master them and, you know, bring that solution, bring that value to the customer. Is the dull stack engineer. The problem is that the dull stack engineer is not cool, okay? That's the big problem. And then he started writing another talk, which is Moby is killing your DevOps effort. Moby being, you know, the new Docker, you know, project. Moby is killing your DevOps effort. And it's nothing, again, against Docker. It's just that when Docker arrived, they promised, you know, lots of things, like production ready, and then it's going to solve lots of problems and so on. But people started using it in the wrong ways, and instead of throwing jar file across the net, they started throwing containers across the net. It didn't solve anything. We still had silos, okay? So it really didn't help your DevOps you know, movement in your companies. So personally, what do I do to be able to, you know, face that onslaught of software? I do research because that's what I was doing before. So I try to figure these things out. I do a lot of Google. And then I stumbled into this paper, and I had no idea it existed. You guys know the mythical man month? Who knows the mythical man month? Okay, not enough people. I think we should all read the mythical man month. Okay, Yuri says yes, okay? Mythical man month is, you know, hey, your software project is late. Let's throw more engineers at it, you know, and it's going to solve the problem. And no, it's not going to solve the problem. If you throw more engineers at it, it's actually going to delay your project, okay? That was published in 1975. I was born, I was 1. And then in 95, they published the 20-year book, and as part of the 20-year book, there's this paper, No Silver Bullet. And it basically says there are no silver bullets in IT, okay? No single software or new management technique can give you a huge increase in productivity, reliability, and simplicity in a span of 10 years. There are no silver bullets. And I really believe in this. So when people come up and they're like, "Ooh, I have very opinionated solution. You know, you should do things like this and things like that, and you know that's the way to go, and it's going to solve all your problems." I'm like, no, it's not going to work. There are no silver bullets. Okay, there are solutions to specific problems, but there are no silver bullets. So that's one of the things that I keep in my mind. No silver bullets. So be extremely careful when people talk about silver bullets. And then, one thing is that software and systems, they do not come out of thin air. It's just like, oh, Docker or Kubernetes. It's not magic. Okay. So I want to take Kubernetes a little bit as an example here. And what I like to do is study the system and understand where does this come from? How is this linked to other technologies and so on? And Sam Ramji, who was the director of the Cloud Foundry Foundation, he had this slide, this diagram. I actually put this diagram in a slide. I couldn't find the original, so I took a snapshot of a previous slide to put it in this slide. But that's the lineage of Kubernetes. And also containers. And I do a lot of Kubernetes training, and I always, show this diagram because when people ask me, well, why do you choose Kubernetes? I'm like, let's look where the technology is coming from. Google was working on Borg, as a system to manage Gmail and Google Apps and everything. It was their internal system. It was a secret for a long time. They were using containers from the start. So the start being 99 for them, 99, 2000. There was no VMs at that time. So they went straight up to containers. They wanted to efficiently use their big clusters, or at least the clusters that they were putting up, starting to put together. So they went to containers and they started developing a system to orchestrate containers. 5 minutes. They invented C groups. They gave C groups to the Linux kernel. With C groups, you can constrain processes. C groups, you put Linux namespaces on it, network namespace, file system namespace, IPC namespace, blank, blank, blank. You end up with containers. You have LXC. Docker shows up. What does Docker do? Really, really good on them. And that's the one thing we should learn from Docker. Empathy with the users. The LXC interface was actually quite difficult to use. And Docker, empathy for the users, they basically write a much better user experience on top of containers. So that was really, really good. That's why they won. But it was basically a layer on top of LXC. And then Rocket arrived, and it gave an OCI, Open Container Initiatives, and so on. So you start seeing how all those techs are linked to each other. On the orchestration side, Mesos, the guys who created Mesos, they were actually inspired by discussions with Google. So they were talking with the guys from Google, about how do you efficiently schedule workloads in your data center. It's like, and Google said, well, you need a multi-level scheduler. You need to write frameworks so that you can, efficiently put this and then allocate resources from this guy and then schedule here. So that's how they invented Mesos. Okay. Cloud Foundry was created by a guy named Derek Collison, who was at Google. So the 12-factor pass stuff is actually invented or created, by Google ideas. And Kubernetes is a rewrite in the open of Borg. So this all, makes sense to me. You need to understand where the technology is coming from, a little bit of history of how things came to be. So when I looked at all of this, I was like, okay, hold on. Kubernetes is a rewrite in the open of Borg. The Google Compute Engine, the Google Cloud, actually runs on top of Borg. Or let's say Google is managing GCE using Borg. So that means that Google is actually running VMs inside containers. Yeah. And I was like, oh, so I have Kubernetes. So Kubernetes is going to kill OpenStack. Don't tweet that because otherwise I'm going to get killed. But and I was like, oh, that's interesting. Kubernetes could be a virtual machine orchestrator. It's also going to kill CloudStack. So I did a little POC, and you can do it. It's extremely easy. Okay, you can actually run a KVM process inside a Docker container. You mount the right volumes, dev KVM, inside the container, and now you're running a VM inside a container. And Kubernetes is orchestrating your VMs. That's exactly what you're doing with OpenStack or CloudStack. Okay, so I wrote that blog in 2005, and I'm like, okay, this all makes sense thanks to me. And even though I was working on CloudStack, I was like, this is great. Why this was great, and I thought it was really, really good, is because if AWS had open sourced EC2 back in 2006, we wouldn't have had OpenStack or CloudStack or Yuka. Okay, we would all have used the AWS solution. Of course, for competitive standpoint, they didn't do that, and then we ended up with the VM orchestrator war, that's life. But that's why I jumped on Kubernetes. And I mentioned this because you need to understand where the tech comes from and why it has arrived to this point. And then when Docker came out, I knew about containers. I had used OpenVZ before. We had used containers before. We had Open Solaris. We had Solaris zones, in production where I was at Purdue University, and I was like, okay, why containers? Why are people going crazy about containers? And instead of being like a hater, I said, okay, I need to pay attention to this. I need to figure out why people are going crazy about containers. Very much like, right now, like I mentioned Envoy. No idea why I'm picking on Envoy, okay? But we need to start understanding why are people using Envoy? Why do they think Envoy is interesting? It's just a little bit of research. So, for me, I was like, okay, I have connections with O'Reilly. Let me write a book on Docker. And I used the book to actually learn what Docker was, okay? The bottom line is that we need to adapt, and that's the culture that we need to have in our organization. We need to have a way that we can adapt without huge crisis, and be able to adapt the infrastructure, be able to adapt the tools all the time. And it doesn't mean adopt. It doesn't mean that we need to jump and adopt every new software out there. Okay, so we need to develop a culture of adaptation. I'm not sure if adaptation is the right word, but anyway. And you get it with the Huda loop. Adrian Cockcroft from Netflix is a big fan of this. I think it also makes sense for your organization as it needs to adapt. You need to observe what's happening in the industry, then orient, decide, and you may decide not to adopt containers. You may decide not to adopt Kubernetes, but at least you know why it's there, where it comes from, and then you are making an informed decision. This is all common sense, okay? I think I'm gonna skip the example about Docker, and this is not at all to criticize Docker. It was just an example about how you can look at Docker and then adapt to it. For me, when I started looking at this and trying to learn about it, you have big questions that you need to ask yourself. Where are the images coming from? What libraries are in those containers? What's the size of the image? Because at the beginning, you were downloading an image. It was a full Linux distribution, and it was, some images were like 1, 2, 3 gigabytes. And you gotta be kidding. This is not a better way to do things. We can do better, even with just a little bit of Python. Okay. So you need to look at things. You need to look at the tooling around those solutions. Docker Machine. When I looked at Docker Machine at the time, it was just a wrapper that was talking to AWS. There was just a little client creating a security group, launching an AWS instance, creating SSH keys. That was what Docker Machine was. But yet people got crazy about Docker Machine. So we need to look at this. And then the big thing is avoid the stars syndrome. GitHub is all about social sharing. Everything is on GitHub. Please avoid the stars syndrome. The top one is Kubernetes, 28,000 stars. The bottom one, that's CloudStack, 503 stars. The reason I'm putting it on there is because it's very interesting. Look at CloudStack. It has 500 stars, but it has 600 clones. It has more clones than stars. I challenge you to find another project on GitHub that has more clones than stars. Usually you have less than 10% clones per stars. So avoid the star syndromes. Why? Because software go viral. This is something that we did at Bitnami. It's a little Debian image. I don't want you to use it. You can just use the traditional Debian image. Something happened like a month ago. A Hacker News thread went viral, and we gained 700 stars or 600 stars in 24 hours. Stars don't mean users. Doesn't mean adoption. It just means that something on Hacker News went crazy, and then people went to your site, and they went click, 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 like a Christmas tree, okay? But it doesn't tell you if it's a good software or not. So don't forget, you're building solutions for your business. You need to develop a culture that adapts to change. Tools will not break your silos, so even if you adopt Docker, it's not going to break your silos. It's not going to really help you with DevOps if you don't do something. Stay curious, be critical, not haters. Thank you very much.